He didn't ask for her name, he demanded obedience. So when Judge Danielle Monroe, seated on the sidewalk in heels and handcuffs, calmly said, "I identified myself twice," the officer just sneered and tightened the cuffs. What he didn't know was that the cameras were already rolling, and the woman he tried to erase was about to become the face of a nationwide reckoning. She didn't expect anything unusual that evening, not on the drive home, not after the applause, not after the soft handshakes and murmured thank yous at the Virginia Civil Liberties Forum. Judge Danielle Monroe had spent nearly 3 decades fighting for truth in courtrooms that rarely gave it freely. At 54, she wore her experience like a second skin, measured, poised, deliberate. That Thursday night in Alexandria was no different. She had delivered a speech about equal protection under the law, about dignity and bias, and the fragile lines between power and perception. She hadn't needed a script, just her conviction and a microphone. The room listened. They always did. And now, with the event behind her and the scent of stale coffee still lingering faintly in her jacket, she was ready to go home, reheat some leftover Thai curry, kick off her heels, and send a goodnight text to her son. The sun had long slipped behind the rooftops, leaving only the amber glow of porch lights and the hush of a quiet residential street. Her Lexus moved slowly, deliberately. She wasn't speeding. Her seatbelt was on. Her phone untouched. She made the left turn onto Sycamore Drive, 3 blocks from her house, and that's when she saw it, flashing blue lights in her rearview. At first, Danielle thought it wasn't for her. She looked down instinctively. Speed, 24 miles per hour. She had just signaled. Hadn't she? She was sure she had. She pulled over calmly, turning the wheel with grace. Her fingers found the window button, her hands rested on the steering wheel. Old habits, learned behaviors. Keep your hands where they can see them. Don't reach too quickly. Smile, even if it doesn't feel natural. The officer approached on the driver's side, flashlight in hand. Mid to late 30s, pale face, stiff posture. She could already tell he was the type who walked like every step was a warning. "License and registration," he barked, not even glancing at her. "Of course, officer," she said, her voice warm but steady. "Can I ask why I was stopped?" "Didn't use your signal at that last stop sign," he said flatly. Danielle blinked. "I believe I did, but one moment." She reached toward her glove box slowly, methodically, and retrieved her license, insurance, and her judicial ID card. "My name is Judge Danielle Monroe. I'm returning home from a speaking engagement downtown." She handed the documents over carefully. He took them without a word. No eye contact. No reaction. He turned and walked back to his cruiser. That was odd. She had been stopped before, it happened, but this felt off. 3 minutes passed. Then 5. The neighborhood was still quiet, save for a soft rustling from a nearby oak tree. She tapped her fingers on the steering wheel gently. When he returned, his voice had changed. "Step out of the car." Danielle looked up, brows narrowing. "I'm sorry?" "I said step out of the vehicle, now." His tone wasn't shouting, but it cut. Sharp. Sudden. "Officer, I don't understand. Is there a reason I'm being asked to exit the vehicle?" "You're being evasive," he snapped. "You've been combative since the beginning. Step out or I'll remove you." Her stomach knotted. "Sir, I'm not being combative. I've complied with everything you've asked. This is your last warning." Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the door. The asphalt felt rough beneath her heels as she stepped out, keeping both hands visible. Across the street, a porch light flickered on. A couple near a mailbox froze, their eyes fixed on her. A teenager on a bike slowed, then pulled out his phone. Danielle stood still. "Turn around," the officer ordered. "Place your hands behind your back." "I haven't done anything wrong," she said, voice calm but low. "You're resisting." His hands were on her before she could say another word. The cold snap of the cuffs hit her wrists hard. She winced but didn't flinch. "Officer," she breathed, "this is a mistake. My credentials are in your hand. My ID says federal appellate." "Judge, you think that puts you above the law," he spat. "That's not how this works." It wasn't about the signal. It never had been. She was now a threat, a problem, a person not to be heard but subdued. She glanced over her shoulder. The boy with the phone was still recording. Their eyes met for a brief second. She didn't shake her head in shame, only disbelief. The sidewalk was uneven. Her balance was off in the heels she hadn't yet taken off. She didn't struggle. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. But something in her chest twisted, tight. Officer Keller stood rigid as he called in the stop, voice flat on the radio. He never once looked back at her. Danielle Monroe sat silently on the edge of the curb, cuffs cutting into her wrists, knees bent awkwardly, the door to her Lexus still open. Her purse was untouched on the passenger seat. Her badge lay face up. The seal of the U.S. Appellate Court visible. Unread. Unacknowledged. "Officer," she tried again, more controlled now, "if you'd take 10 seconds to read the badge you're holding, remain silent." "Ma'am," he cut her off. He had one hand resting on his belt, the other hovering too close to his sidearm. He was pacing now, not watching her, watching the houses, the gathering eyes. A silver-haired man stepped out onto his front porch. "Is everything okay here?" he called. "Sir, go back inside," Keller snapped. "That woman's a judge," the man called again. "She spoke at the Civic Forum this week." That stopped him, just briefly. "Sir, I said go back inside." He didn't. Across the street, a second phone went up. Another neighbor filming. The air was still, but it wasn't calm. It was the kind of quiet that carries weight. Danielle didn't move. She didn't speak again. She had said enough. Keller turned back to her, scowling. "Why didn't you say anything when I pulled you over?" "I did," she replied, simply. "Twice." His eyes burned through her as if she had insulted him by breathing. He stepped back, muttering. Under his breath. 10 more minutes passed. Still no backup. But the crowd had grown. Soft murmurs. Eyes filled with something close to confusion and anger and recognition. A young man in a Georgetown hoodie stepped forward. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked carefully. Danielle turned her head. "I'm fine." "Please, just keep recording." Keller spun around. "Back up, now." "I'm on the sidewalk, sir," the young man replied, firm but steady. "Back up or you'll be next." "Then I'll be next," he said, not moving. "Not louder, just there." "Present." Keller's radio crackled. "Back up en route." He was sweating now. Tense. Wound too tight for the moment. Danielle didn't flinch. She watched. She waited. Her silence said what her voice didn't. When the second cruiser pulled in, the officer who stepped out was shorter, older, with quiet strength in her gait. Officer Maria Cortez took one look at Danielle, then at Keller, then at the ID in the seat. "Is this hers?" she asked. "She says it is," Keller muttered. Cortez frowned, picked it up. "Read it." Then read it again. "Ma'am," she asked softly, "are you Judge Danielle Monroe?" "Yes." A flicker passed across Cortez's face, concern masked behind procedure. She turned to Keller. "You cuffed a federal appellate judge?" She didn't comply. "Got aggressive," he said quickly. "She's sitting in heels, Brian." Cortez didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. "Unlock the cuffs." Keller hesitated. "Now." He knelt. The metal clicked free. Danielle didn't wince as she rolled her wrists slowly. Cortez helped her to her feet. "I apologize, ma'am," she said quietly. Danielle nodded once. "I want your badge numbers. Both of you." Cortez gave hers immediately. Keller mumbled his. Danielle's voice didn't waver. You'll be hearing from the court. And though the cameras didn't catch what she said next, her eyes did. And so did the people. The boy in the hoodie. The couple across the street. The silver-haired man still watching from his porch. They wouldn't forget what they saw. Not tonight. Not ever. The cuffs had only just clicked open when the first video hit the internet. A shaky clip, 37 seconds long, uploaded by the teenager in the hoodie, already had hundreds of views before Danielle even made it back into her Lexus. In the frame, a woman in heels, seated silently on a sidewalk, hands bound behind her back, and the words she said, "She's a judge." He didn't care, in bold white caption across the screen. It would not be the last video. From across the street, another angle showed the moment Officer Maria Cortez arrived and unlocked the cuffs, her voice calm, her movements measured. Danielle didn't say much, not to the officers, not to the bystanders, but her silence was louder than any outburst. She stepped into her car, adjusted her blouse, and pulled away from the curb without slamming the door. Her wrists were raw, red lines forming like quiet warnings beneath her sleeves. By the time she pulled into her garage and turned off the engine, the first wave of tweets had begun to surge. By 11:03 p.m., #Judge Monroe was trending in the D.C. metro area. By midnight, it had spread to the East Coast feed. The comments poured in, "You're telling me a black female appellate judge got cuffed for a turn signal, and credentials mean nothing when bias speaks first." Images began circulating, screenshots from her courtroom, a still from her keynote address that very evening, and side-by-sides of her seated on the sidewalk, juxtaposed against her black robe, gavel in hand. The contrast was jarring. The silence in her face, both as a judge and as a detainee, said it all. Still, Danielle didn't react. She sat quietly at her kitchen table, hands wrapped around a glass of water she hadn't touched. Her phone buzzed. Her son had texted twice. "Mom, are you okay? I saw a clip, please call." She didn't. Not yet. Her pulse still hadn't slowed. Upstairs, she slipped off her heels, changed into soft slippers, and tried not to look at her reflection in the hallway mirror. In the morning, she rose at 5:30, as usual, brewed coffee, and reviewed motions for a sentencing hearing later that day. At 7:14, her email pinged, the court administrator notifying her that media had begun reaching out, requesting comment. By 8:20 a.m., a line of reporters had formed across from the courthouse steps. But Judge Monroe entered through the side entrance, head high, expression unreadable. She passed through security. No statements. No comment. Just her presence, and the weight it carried. Inside the courtroom, the clerks said little, but their eyes followed her every move. Some looked down. Others looked angry. Outside, protesters had already started to gather. Not with megaphones. Not with chants. But with signs, "We see you, Judge Monroe, justice wears heels too, and simply dignity deserves protection." Across the city, law students organized silent vigils, holding books in one hand, cell phones in the other. Community leaders spoke out on radio programs. Pastors dedicated sermons to dignity and due process. At Howard Law, a professor paused his lecture and said, "If this can happen to her, none of us are exempt." Still, Danielle said nothing. She ruled on motions. She presided over hearings. She wore a black suit with sharp lines and a crimson scarf tucked neatly at the neck. Her chambers, usually a space of calm discussion and legal rigor, became a quiet shrine of solidarity. Someone left flowers without a card. A folded sticky note simply read, "We've got your back." And yet the question grew louder, why hadn't she spoken? Why hadn't she gone on camera, issued a statement, told the public what they already suspected? The answer lived in her posture. In the restraint she held tighter than any grievance. That afternoon, her phone rang again, this time, the mayor's office. Mayor Cynthia Langston, in her carefully rehearsed voice, said, "Judge Monroe, I wanted to personally offer my sincerest apologies. I would welcome the chance to speak privately." Danielle interrupted, not coldly, but clearly. "There's nothing private about public humiliation, Mayor. What I need is accountability, not condolences." The line was quiet. "Understood," the mayor said, and hung up. Meanwhile, the Alexandria Police Department issued a vague public statement late that evening. "We are aware of an incident involving Judge Danielle Monroe and are conducting an internal review. The officer in question has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation." No mention of her name in the body of the release. No acknowledgement of what millions had already seen. The public was not satisfied. A petition demanding Officer Keller's termination gathered over 50,000 signatures in under 48 hours. Local clergy formed a unity council. Civil rights organizations demanded a town hall. But Danielle continued her work. Each day, she returned to her bench. She ruled with impartiality. She greeted her clerks. And when a young defense attorney nervously whispered, "We're with you," she simply nodded and said, "Let's proceed with the case." Still, behind her silence, the pressure built. Her inbox filled with requests from 60 Minutes, The Washington Post, The Root, MSNBC. She declined them all. Not because she had nothing to say, but because the world wasn't listening for truth, they were hunting for spectacle. That Saturday morning, a new voice entered the conversation. Officer Maria Cortez, the woman who had freed her wrists, quietly filed an internal report. It contained 3 clear statements. 1, the judge had identified herself immediately. 2, she had not been noncompliant. 3, Officer Cortez believed there had been no cause for detainment. The report was short, factual, direct. But within hours, someone inside the department leaked it. The public response was immediate. Local outlets posted headlines like "Fellow Officer Disputes Arrest of Federal Judge" and "Cortez Report Contradicts Official Narrative." The divide grew sharper. In a televised panel, a former federal prosecutor said, "This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a dismissal of identity. Not seeing her wasn't accidental. It was intentional." Social media exploded again. Clips of Danielle's courtroom rulings played alongside videos of her on the sidewalk. Memes appeared. Hashtags evolved. But still, she said nothing. She sat in silence, letting others speak, letting the story take shape without her steering it. And in that stillness, something extraordinary happened. People began to reflect. Not just react, but truly look. Conversations shifted. Students wrote essays. Churches hosted panels. A group of teens created digital art of her seated on the curb, but wearing her robe, gavel in hand, haloed by justice scales. People weren't just defending her. They were learning from her. And yet, Officer Keller remained silent. No apology. No statement. He had reportedly hired legal counsel and had stopped reporting to work. His neighborhood was quiet now, visibly tense. Neighbors whispered. Reporters hovered. The union offered support, but it was half-hearted. The department remained tight-lipped. But Danielle? She remained. Present. Grounded. Unshaken in public, even as the world around her roared. She received a letter from a middle schooler. "When I grow up, I want to be a judge like you, calm even when it's not fair." Her eyes lingered on that sentence longer than she meant to. That night, as she sat at her desk, rereading filings for an upcoming case, she paused. Not for long. Just enough to glance down at her wrists. The redness had faded. The memory had not. She reached for her pen, opened a fresh page in her journal, and wrote a single line. "They didn't believe me when I spoke. But maybe they'll believe what they saw." Then she turned out the light, closed the book, and went to sleep. Her silence had not been weakness. It had been the beginning of something deeper. The quiet before a voice finally rises, not in anger, but in clarity. She hadn't planned to speak, not at first. Not after the footage had circled the nation, not after the op-eds and the panel discussions and the quiet notes slipped under her office door. Danielle Monroe had watched the world react without ever raising her own voice, and in that silence, she saw how far a single moment could echo. She'd read the emails from law students who said they'd cried watching her composure, listened to the voicemails from strangers urging her to sue, watched from her office window as protesters stood quietly on the courthouse steps with signs that read "Dignity handcuffed" and "This is what erasure looks like." And still, she said nothing. But something in her shifted after she reread Officer Maria Cortez's internal memo, the one that was leaked and reprinted in nearly every major paper. It wasn't long, just 3 paragraphs, but it confirmed what everyone suspected, that Danielle had identified herself immediately, that she had been calm and compliant, and that there had been no cause to detain her. It was the final line that sat with her longest. "I believe this incident undermines public trust in a way I can no longer ignore." Danielle folded the report and placed it in her drawer beside her late husband's pocket Bible and her son's handwritten letter from his first week at college. That night, she sat on her balcony with a cup of peppermint tea going cold beside her and scribbled on the back of a utility bill envelope, "What does justice require of me now?" By morning, the answer came not in legal briefs or motions but in the invitation to speak at the Virginia Law Center. A community town hall had been scheduled, but after the department's latest press release, vague and unapologetic, public pressure pushed the organizers to give Danielle the floor. They didn't expect her to say yes. She did. The room was packed. Reporters filled the back wall. Clergy sat near the front. A row of law students lined the side, notebooks on their laps, eyes wide. Danielle walked in wearing navy slacks, a dark blouse, and a single silver pin at her collar. No robe. No script. No prepared remarks. Just presence. She approached the podium without hesitation, adjusted the microphone, and looked out over the crowd, not as a symbol, not as a victim, but as a witness. "I wasn't going to speak," she began, her voice low but steady, "not because I had nothing to say, but because I wasn't sure the world was ready to listen." The room fell silent. That Thursday night, I was returning home. I had given a talk on dignity under the law. I was tired. I was alone. I signaled at a stop sign, at least, I believe I did, and moments later, I was face down in my own neighborhood, handcuffed, watched, filmed, judged. Her voice didn't rise, but it deepened. I identified myself. Twice. I handed over my judicial ID. I didn't shout. I didn't resist. I didn't run. But I was not seen. She paused. Let it settle. That officer didn't see a judge. He didn't see a neighbor. He didn't see a widow returning from work. He saw a problem. A challenge. A woman who dared to question. Murmurs stirred softly through the crowd, but she continued. "I'm not here to call for vengeance. I'm not here to demand that someone lose their job or their pension. I'm here because this can't be allowed to fade. I'm here because this isn't about me, it's about the system that let it happen." Her hand moved gently to the edge of the podium. Justice is only justice when it recognizes everyone's dignity, even in silence. And too often, that silence is misread as weakness. But silence can also be a choice. A shield. A mirror. She leaned slightly forward. "I don't want performative apologies. I don't need press conferences with rehearsed remorse. I want change. I want mandatory training on implicit bias, on de-escalation, on the human cost of assumptions. I want policies that treat identity with the same seriousness as evidence. I want officers who don't see badges and robes as optional forms of protection." The applause began softly, just a few hands, but grew. Steady. Real. Her son stood in the back, hands clenched into fists at his sides, eyes shining. Danielle looked down once before meeting the crowd again. "I have carried myself with dignity my entire career, not because I expected to be treated differently, but because I believed that modeling respect would invite it in return. That belief was tested that night. And I'm still here." That was the moment the cameras zoomed in, when clips of her words would later be played on every major network under titles like Grace Under Pressure and Justice Without Rage. But in that room, it wasn't about networks or narratives, it was about clarity. Her speech lasted just under 7 minutes. When it ended, she stepped back without waiting for fanfare and returned to her seat. She didn't linger for interviews. She didn't pose for photos. She left through the same door she entered. That same night, Officer Cortez sent a handwritten note to Danielle's office. It arrived in a plain envelope, no department seal, no typing, just ink and honesty. Your silence taught me more than any academy course ever could. I'm sorry you had to carry that. I'll spend the rest of my time in this uniform trying to deserve the public's trust. Danielle didn't respond. But she read it twice. A week later, the police department officially dismissed Officer Keller. The press release was careful, no admission of wrongdoing, no direct apology, but it was final. Keller was gone. And while some demanded charges, Danielle remained firm in her decision. She would not press criminal charges. Firing a man is not justice. Changing the system that trained him to disregard me? That's where the work lives. The work, as it turned out, had only just begun. Law schools across Virginia began incorporating the incident into courses on constitutional law and racial bias. At the University of Richmond, a seminar titled Power, Perception, and the law filled its registration limit within days. In Arlington, a group of public defenders launched a student-led initiative called the Monroe Code, a program to educate young people on their rights during police encounters, using Danielle's case as a foundation. But the impact rippled in quieter places too, in barbershops, in book clubs, and Sunday sermons. A teacher at a local high school assigned her speech for a civics discussion. A librarian curated a reading list titled When the Law Looks Away. And at the same neighborhood where it all began, a mural appeared on a brick wall, a portrait of Danielle seated on the sidewalk, her face lifted calmly, a single word painted in bold beneath her image, seen. But Danielle didn't let it change her. She still arrived to court early, still brought her own tea from home, still ruled with the same firm but fair demeanor she always had. What had changed was the air when she entered. Officers in her courtroom stood straighter. Young attorneys watched more carefully. And the silence that used to be casual now came laced with respect. She didn't need to remind anyone of what happened. Her presence did the talking now. On the 1-month anniversary of the incident, she sat on her townhouse balcony again, a soft breeze brushing the edge of her notepad. She wrote 3 columns on a fresh page: what I wanted to say, what I did say, what I still need to say. And then, without thinking too hard, she picked up her phone and posted a single message online, her first and only public statement since the press conference. I didn't need to raise my voice. I just needed them to look closer. It was shared over 50,000 times in 24 hours. But Danielle didn't check the comments. She closed her laptop, picked up a legal file, sipped her tea. The world would keep moving. But something had shifted, something deep and lasting. Because of a signal light, because of silence, because of how she stood still when the world tried to erase her. And if you're reading this, thinking it couldn't happen to someone you know, remember, it already did. And next time, it might not be a judge in heels. It might be your neighbor, your teacher, your parent. And when it does, ask yourself, will you look closer or will you look away? What happened to Judge Danielle Monroe is not just a story about a wrongful traffic stop. It's a mirror held up to the systems we've built, the assumptions we carry, and the quiet dignity that too often goes unrecognized. In that moment on the sidewalk, Danielle didn't raise her voice. She didn't resist, and she didn't crumble. Instead, she remained. And that, perhaps, was the most powerful form of resistance there is. The lesson here is simple, but not easy. Titles don't always protect us, but character still defines us. Even when someone refuses to see you, your experience, your credentials, your humanity, how you carry yourself still matters. Judge Monroe reminded us that you don't need to shout to be heard, and that silence can be a sharp, deliberate force. This story is a call to everyone, especially those in positions of authority. See people. Don't just look, truly see them. Don't reduce someone to a stereotype or a moment of perceived challenge. Behind every driver's license is a life. Behind every calm tone is a lifetime of restraint. And behind every act of stillness, there may be decades of earned wisdom. To those who feel unseen, unacknowledged, or wrongly judged, know this: your presence matters. Your grace matters. You do not have to overperform your worth. Sometimes, simply standing still is enough to change the conversation. To law enforcement officers, educators, public servants, this story is a plea for better training, deeper empathy, and honest accountability. We must do better, because our communities cannot afford for justice to remain blind to bias. And finally, to you, our listener, our supporter, our fellow learner, thank you. From all of us at U.S. Instructive Stories, we are deeply grateful for your time, your engagement, and your willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. If this story moved you, challenged your thinking, or opened your heart even a little, we ask just one thing: share it. Let it spark a conversation in your home, your workplace, your community. Because change doesn't always come through noise. Sometimes, it begins with someone simply refusing to disappear. Until next time, thank you for listening, and remember, truth speaks loudest when it stands still.